Shocking gasps filled the courtroom as Kody Brown walked through the heavy wooden doors, his eyes darting nervously around the packed audience. The heavy thud of his footsteps echoed across the marble floor, each step sounding more like a countdown to disaster. Reporters scrambled with notepads. Photographers lifted cameras high, and the flashing lights lit up his face like a spotlight on a man about to be judged, not just by the court, but by the entire world. The benches were crowded, every seat filled with people who had come to witness history unfold. Some were loyal fans of Sister Wives, curious to see the man they had once admired in a very different light. Others were critics, eager for the chance to watch the mighty fall. But all eyes, without exception, were locked on Kody. The once confident star of reality television now looked cornered, exposed and stripped of the grand image he had always tried so hard to maintain. And there, sitting only a few feet away, were the women who had once shared his life, his home, his story. Christine, Janelle, and Mary sat side by side, a rare sight that in itself spoke volumes. Their arms were folded tightly, their eyes sharp, unblinking. There was no warmth in their stares, no trace of the affection they once held. Their presence alone was like a wall of judgment, reminding Kody of every promise broken, every betrayal buried beneath years of television smiles. The air inside the courtroom was heavy, suffocating even. It wasn't just the curiosity of the crowd, it was the weight of secrets that everyone knew were about to spill out into the open. Rumors had been circulating for months. Whispers of hidden money, questions about property, accusations of manipulation. Now, at long last, the truth was about to be dragged out into the harsh, unforgiving light of justice. Kody adjusted his tie, though his hand trembled slightly as he did. He forced his jaw tight, his lips pressed into a thin line, as if he could hold in his frustration by sheer force of will. He was used to being in control, used to setting the narrative. On television, he could spin his words, paint himself as the misunderstood husband doing his best. But this courtroom wasn't TLC. Here no editing, no clever confessionals, no dramatic music could save him. Here only facts, evidence and testimony would matter. The judge entered, and immediately the room shifted into silence. The sound of the gavel striking wood sent a jolt through the air like a gunshot, signaling the beginning of a showdown years in the making. The judge's eyes swept the room, pausing briefly on Kody, then shifting to the three women sitting across from him. She knew exactly what this case meant, not just to the people involved, but to the millions who had followed their story for over a decade. As the judge took her seat, a reporter whispered loudly enough to be heard, "This is going to be the trial of the year." Kody lowered himself into his chair, but his restless energy gave him away. His eyes kept flicking toward his ex-wives, then back to the judge, then out to the crowd. He wanted to appear calm, but the truth was written in the tension of his shoulders, in the quickened rhythm of his breathing. Christine leaned slightly forward, whispering something to Janelle, and the faintest smile appeared on her face. It wasn't joy, it was relief. Relief that after years of silence, after years of feeling unheard, the moment had finally come to confront the man who had held so much control over their lives. For the audience watching, it felt less like a courtroom and more like the climax of a gripping drama. A man once idolized as a father of 18 and a spiritual leader of his family was now being cast in an entirely different role, the defendant in a case that could destroy his reputation, his finances, and the last shred of his carefully constructed image. The bailiff called for order, but the buzzing energy in the room couldn't be silenced. People leaned forward in their seats, phones hidden in their hands to text the outside world with updates. Every single person wanted to capture this story as it unfolded in real time. And yet, amid all the noise, there was a strange, almost electric silence surrounding Kody himself. His thoughts seemed louder than the crowd. He replayed the years in his mind, the cameras in his home, the arguments over love and jealousy, the shifting loyalty of wives, the episodes edited to make him appear stronger than he was. Now none of that mattered. No director could rewrite this script. This was real. The first file was placed on the judge's desk. thick, heavy papers that carried the weight of years of financial records. The sound of the folder hitting the desk was like thunder in Kody's ears. He knew what was inside. He knew the accusations waiting to be spoken aloud. Across the aisle, Christine's eyes locked on him. No fear, no hesitation, just determination. Janelle sat with her hands clasped tightly together, as if holding in the storm of emotions she had carried for so long. Mary remained still, her face unreadable, but the tension in her jaw told its own story. Together they were united in a way they had never been during the years of polygamy. Divided in love, but united in truth. The silence stretched. For a moment it felt like the entire room was holding its breath, waiting for the first blow to land. And then in that frozen second before the lawyers spoke, Kody realized something that shook him more than the trial itself. This was no longer his story to control. For years he had been the center, the one who spoke the loudest, the one the cameras followed. But now the spotlight had shifted. The women he once overshadowed had stepped forward, ready to tell their side. And the world was here to listen. The judge leaned forward. "This court is now in session." The words sliced through the tension, sharp and final. This was it. There would be no turning back. No chance to escape. The battle lines had been drawn. And as the first lawyer rose to speak, the entire courtroom leaned in, knowing they were about to witness a storm of revelations, betrayals, and truths that would leave nothing in Kody Brown's world untouched. The stage was set. The masks were off. And the secrets of Kody Brown's empire were about to be laid bare for all to see. Kody Brown had always been a man larger than life, but few truly understood the complexities behind the smiles that television cameras captured. To millions of viewers, he was the patriarch of an extraordinary family, a man managing 4 wives and 18 children, living what seemed like the perfect if unconventional reality. His life was broadcast in dazzling colors, set to the background of heartfelt confessions, family dinners, and dramatic confrontations that played out for the cameras. But behind the bright lights and polished editing, the truth was far messier than any episode could convey. The Brown family's story began simply enough. Kody, a devout man of faith, believed deeply in the values of family and loyalty. He sought a life that embraced both love and tradition, marrying his first wife Mary with sincerity and commitment. Over the years this family grew, expanded and faced challenges unique to polygamy in modern society. Kody became both a father and a manager, juggling schedules, emotions, and the delicate balancing act of multiple households under one roof. Reality television, however, transformed this personal journey into a public spectacle. Every argument, every tear, every moment of joy was broadcast to millions, turning private struggles into public entertainment. Viewers marveled at Kody's ability to keep harmony among his wives, applauded his dedication to his children, and even envied his seemingly unshakable calm in the face of chaos. Social media erupted with discussions about his parenting skills, his religious devotion, and the moral complexities of his lifestyle. For a time it seemed Kody had it all: a devoted family, fame, and a fortune built on the fascination of the world. Yet, fame is a double-edged sword. Behind closed doors, cracks began to form in the carefully constructed image. Maintaining 4 marriages wasn't just a challenge, it was a storm of emotion, expectation, and conflict. Arguments that could have been private were often amplified by cameras and crew, creating pressure that no ordinary family could endure. The wives, once enthusiastic participants in the reality experiment, began to voice frustration and resentment. Private grievances became public rumors, and the web of secrecy that Kody relied on to maintain control started unraveling. Financial tensions compounded the personal struggles. While viewers saw lavish trips, well-decorated homes, and a family seemingly flourishing, the reality was more complicated. Managing multiple households, financing daily life for 18 children, and keeping up appearances on television created immense strain. The cameras caught some of the drama, but never the full picture. Unpaid bills, money disputes among the wives, and decisions Kody made behind closed doors that would later be questioned in the harshest way possible: in court. The family's dynamic was already fragile when the inevitable happened. Divorce and separation began to enter the picture. One by one, the wives started stepping away, driven by a mixture of personal need, financial disagreements, and the desire for independence. What had once been a unified, albeit unconventional, family now faced tension, legal battles, and public scrutiny. And Kody, the man who had controlled the narrative for so long, was suddenly forced to confront the consequences of the choices he had made. This is where the stage was set for the courtroom drama that would shock millions. From the moment they entered the room, there was a palpable sense of resolve. No whispered arguments, no subtle tensions, no attempts to outshine one another, just three women standing firmly together. The air around them seemed to vibrate with quiet power, a kind of calm determination that contrasted sharply with Kody's visible tension. For the first time, the wives weren't acting on camera. There was no script, no director instructing them on what to say or how to behave. This was raw, authentic, and unfiltered. Christine's eyes were steady, focused on the judge, but occasionally flicking to Kody with a look that could cut through steel. Years of frustration and silent endurance had coalesced into something formidable. She was ready, not just to recount the financial inequities or the emotional neglect, but to assert herself in a way that left no room for doubt. Her attorney, a sharp, no-nonsense figure, prepared the documents that would lay bare the discrepancies in finances, property, and assets that had long been hidden from public view. Janelle, sitting beside Christine, exuded a different kind of strength. Her composure was almost regal, but beneath the calm exterior lay a storm of emotions, memories, and unspoken truths. She had watched the family dynamic play out for years, witnessed favoritism, and endured subtle manipulations that had eroded her sense of security. Now, she had the opportunity to articulate her experience, to ensure that the sacrifices she had made, often overshadowed by television drama, were finally acknowledged. Mary, the first wife, brought with her a quiet intensity. She had long been the anchor of the family, the one whose stability allowed the others to navigate their roles. Yet, her calm facade belied a depth of disappointment, and at times, betrayal. In this courtroom, her silence was no longer a shield. It was a statement. She had chosen her words carefully over the years, but now, every detail she revealed would carry weight, shaping the perception of the family and the man who had once led it. The courtroom itself seemed to sense the shift in energy. Kody, accustomed to being the center of attention and control, now found himself on the defensive, facing not a fragmented group of individuals, but a united front. The ex-wives' alliance was not merely symbolic. It was strategic, deliberate, and powerful. Every glance, every gesture, every carefully chosen word would reinforce the narrative of accountability and fairness. As the proceedings began, the first wave of testimony revealed not just financial discrepancies, but the emotional toll of living under Kody's control. Christine's voice, steady yet tinged with anger, recounted nights spent worrying about bills while Kody managed projects and investments without her knowledge. She detailed moments when she had been excluded from decisions that directly affected her life and her children, painting a picture of imbalance, control, and secrecy. The courtroom listened, rapt, as she outlined years of overlooked contributions and unseen sacrifices. Janelle followed with her own testimony, emphasizing the emotional strain and psychological impact of Kody's actions. She described instances where trust had been broken, promises had been ignored, and autonomy had been undermined. Her words were measured, but each sentence landed like a hammer strike, building an undeniable case that the women had endured far more than the public had ever imagined. Mary's turn was quieter but no less impactful. She spoke of the cumulative effect of years of subtle manipulation, of living in a system where her voice was often secondary, and of the frustration of having her contributions minimized. Each revelation, though calm and deliberate, added layers of depth to the courtroom's understanding of Kody's life behind the cameras. The women's stories, while unique, converged on a single, undeniable truth: they had been wronged, and they were here to demand recognition and justice. What made this united front even more compelling was the interplay of emotion and strategy. The women were not attacking recklessly. They were presenting facts, evidence, and testimony that had been meticulously prepared. Their approach was deliberate, calculated in the best sense, designed to leave no room for misinterpretation. This was not a spectacle for television. It was a meticulous dismantling of the carefully curated narrative Kody had presented for years. Kody himself was visibly rattled. The man who had long relied on charm, authority, and public perception found himself outmaneuvered by the very people he had once overshadowed. Each statement, each document presented, chipped away at his image, forcing him to confront realities he had long avoided. For the first time, the power dynamic had shifted, and he could feel it in every glance, every whispered exchange between the ex-wives and their legal team. Outside the courtroom, reporters whispered eagerly, sensing the historic nature of the proceedings. Social media buzzed with speculation and commentary as snippets of testimony emerged. Fans debated who was right and who was wrong, but one thing was undeniable: the ex-wives' united front had changed the story. No longer were they supporting characters in Kody's life, they were protagonists asserting their narrative, reshaping public perception, and demanding accountability on their terms. The courtroom, too, seemed to lean into the tension. The judge, aware of the historical and social implications, observed closely, weighing not only the facts but the context and weight of the women's collective testimony. Each argument made, each document presented, reinforced the undeniable shift in narrative. Kody Brown was no longer the uncontested patriarch. He was a man answering to the consequences of his decisions. By the time the first witnesses were called, the energy in the room had transformed completely. The ex-wives were no longer just present, they were commanding attention, shaping the proceedings, and making it clear that their years of patience, endurance, and resilience were now central to the story. For viewers following the saga from afar, the courtroom drama had become something much deeper than reality TV. It was a tale of empowerment, justice, and the reclaiming of voices long suppressed. As the session continued, every detail presented by Christine, Janelle, and Mary reinforced the same core message. The Brown family's public narrative had been incomplete, controlled by a single perspective. Now the truth, in all its complexity and nuance, was emerging. And for Kody, that truth was undeniable. The women were no longer acting within his shadow, they had stepped into the light, united, unflinching, and unstoppable. By the end of the day, it was clear to everyone present: the ex-wives' united front had changed the course of the courtroom battle. What began as a standard legal proceeding had evolved into a historic display of resilience, strategy, and empowerment. The man who once commanded the narrative had been challenged, not by strangers or critics, but by the very women who had once shared his life, his home, and his story. And as the gavel fell to adjourn the session, one truth resonated throughout the room, in the minds of everyone watching, listening, and reading about it. The power had shifted. The ex-wives were no longer silent, they were in control of their story, and nothing would ever be the same. Kody Brown sat in the courtroom chair, his hands folded tightly in front of him, yet the slight tremor in his fingers betrayed a nervousness he tried desperately to conceal. For years he had been the architect of his own image, the charismatic patriarch, the man of faith and integrity, the father admired by millions. But in that courtroom, under the stern gaze of the judge, the relentless eyes of the press, and the unflinching stares of his ex-wives, Kody found himself facing a different reality. For the first time in his life, he couldn't rely on carefully curated camera angles, scripted confessionals, or edited episodes to present his side of the story. This was raw, unfiltered, and unrelenting. And as the lead attorney representing him rose, the courtroom seemed to lean in collectively, anticipating the defense that would either preserve Kody's reputation or shatter it completely. "Ladies and gentlemen," the lawyer began, his voice steady and commanding, "this case is not about greed or betrayal. It is not an indictment of character. Mr. Brown has been a devoted husband, a father, and a man of faith throughout his life. The accusations presented today are exaggerated, select, and in many instances, misleading. The words were delivered with precision, but Kody's eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt. He wanted to believe the defense could withstand the storm of evidence and testimony that had already begun to accumulate against him. Yet, even as his lawyer spoke, the collective weight of the ex-wives' united front hung heavily in the air, a reminder that the courtroom narrative was no longer under his control. Kody straightened in his chair, adjusting his tie for what felt like the 100th time that morning. He knew every eye in the room was on him, every whisper from the press, every subtle glance from the audience, weighing him. This was his moment to respond, to assert his innocence, to reclaim the narrative he had lost. But the task was monumental. The documents, the testimonies, the evidence of financial discrepancies. It was a mountain to climb, and Kody was climbing it under the harsh spotlight of scrutiny. The defense attorney continued, presenting a carefully structured argument, meant to counteract the claims made by Christine, Janelle, and Mary. He emphasized Kody's role as a provider, the responsibilities he had shouldered in managing 4 households, and the financial pressures of raising 18 children. He argued that decisions made without full consultation were not malicious but necessary, reflecting the complexity of managing a large, unconventional family. But every point made by the attorney seemed to bounce off the solid wall of the ex-wife's resolve. Christine's eyes narrowed ever so slightly, Janelle's posture remained unwavering, and Mary's calm intensity never faltered. Each woman had prepared meticulously, anticipating every defense argument, and ready to respond with facts, documents, and personal testimony that no amount of rhetoric could dismiss. Kody himself finally spoke, his voice calm but tinged with a subtle strain. Christine's eyes met Kody's across the room. She held his gaze for a long, tense moment, and in that instant, the courtroom seemed to pulse with unspoken history. Memories of shared rooms, whispered arguments, financial struggles, and moments of heartbreak swirled in the air, heavier than any legal document. She straightened in the witness chair, took a deep breath, and began, "For years I trusted him," she said, her voice steady but laced with a quiet intensity. "I trusted that he would provide for us, that he would consider our needs, and that our voices mattered. But time and again, I discovered that decisions were made without transparency. Money was moved, accounts were controlled, and promises were broken. The words were simple, yet each carried the weight of years of frustration and silent endurance." The courtroom absorbed her testimony like a sponge, hanging on each detail, each revelation. Reporters scribbled notes furiously, capturing phrases that would later dominate headlines. Financial secrecy, broken promises, trust betrayed. Christine's lawyer guided her through the evidence meticulously. Documents that had once been hidden from view, bank statements, property deeds, emails were presented, each confirming the accusations. She spoke aloud. It was one thing to claim deception, another entirely to have the evidence corroborate every claim. The courtroom, already tense, seemed to lean forward, aware that history was being made in real time. The most shocking part of Christine's testimony wasn't just about finances. It was the personal toll. "There were nights," she continued, her voice quivering slightly but firm, "when I had to choose between paying bills and feeding my children. At the same time, Mr. Brown would spend money on personal projects or trips, often without discussing them with me. It felt as though my contributions, my sacrifices, and my role in this family were invisible." The judge's eyebrows knitted together. Kody shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His composed exterior from earlier sections was beginning to crack, revealing a man confronted with the tangible results of his choices. The air in the room was heavy with tension, every word Christine spoke acting like another brick in a wall of accountability. Janelle and Mary, sitting beside Christine, exchanged subtle nods. Their eyes fixed on Kody, reflected a mix of vindication and resolve. For years they had witnessed the strain and inequities firsthand, but now, hearing Christine articulate her experience with clarity and poise, they seemed emboldened. The courtroom wasn't just witnessing one woman's truth. It was the collective revelation of a family's hidden struggles. Christine continued, detailing specific incidents that painted a broader picture of imbalance and control. She recounted moments when Kody had signed property agreements without consultation, withheld critical financial information, and made decisions impacting the family without discussion. Each example, supported by documents and evidence, made the courtroom sit up straighter, absorbing the gravity of years of mismanagement and secrecy. The most gripping part of her testimony came when she described the emotional cost. It wasn't just about money, she said softly, letting the words sink in. It was about respect, autonomy, and the acknowledgement of our contributions. We built this family together. We supported him, managed households, and raised children. And yet, time and again, our voices were dismissed. Today, we are here to ensure that our sacrifices are recognized and that accountability is enforced. Even the press, accustomed to drama from reality television, seemed caught in the weight of the moment. The cameras had captured the public smiles and orchestrated arguments for years, but this was raw, unedited, and deeply human. Millions who had watched the Browns on television were now seeing the consequences of actions that had previously been hidden behind the glamorous lens of reality TV. Kody's defense team attempted to respond mid-testimony, raising procedural questions and challenging minor points. But Christine's resolve never wavered. She answered with clarity, never allowing distraction or intimidation to derail her statements. Her credibility was undeniable, her demeanor composed yet emotionally resonant. The courtroom seemed to pulse with every revelation, and Kody's carefully constructed narrative began to feel increasingly fragile. The lawyer guiding Christine concluded with a powerful statement that resonated beyond the walls of the courtroom. "This testimony is not about revenge or malice," she said. "It is about truth, fairness, and recognition. These women dedicated their lives to this family. Their contributions, sacrifices, and trust were real. And now, it is time for accountability." The moment hung in the air. Silence followed, broken only by the faint rustle of papers and the subtle shifting of spectators in their seats. Kody leaned back, his jaw tight, processing not just the evidence but the emotional intensity of the testimony. It was one thing to face legal claims. It was another to confront the lived experiences of the women he had once overshadowed. Outside the courtroom, the world was already reacting. Social media feeds exploded with snippets of Christine's statements, commentators debating, analyzing, and speculating. Headlines were prepared to declare the turning point in a saga that had fascinated audiences for over a decade. Viewers who had once cheered for Kody were now confronted with a more complicated truth: fame and control could not erase accountability. Inside the courtroom, the effect was immediate. Kody's body language shifted from composed to defensive, his eyes betraying tension that words could not hide. The ex-wives' united front, reinforced by this compelling testimony, had begun to dominate the narrative. It was no longer a question of intent or perception. It was a matter of documented reality, corroborated by first-hand accounts and hard evidence. As the session drew to a close, Christine returned to her seat with a quiet sense of satisfaction. She had spoken her truth, articulated the injustices endured over years, and reinforced the power of collective resilience. The ex-wives' alliance, strengthened by this testimony, now commanded the courtroom's attention in a way that could not be ignored. And Kody, once confident and commanding in his public persona, faced a new reality. The story he had long controlled was slipping from his grasp. The shocking testimony had shifted the balance of power, revealing not just financial mismanagement but the emotional cost of his decisions, and the strength of the women he had underestimated. As the gavel adjourned the session, a palpable tension remained. The courtroom had witnessed not just testimony but a reckoning. Christine's words echoed beyond the walls, reaching millions of viewers who had followed the family's story. Reality has consequences, and justice once pursued cannot be silenced. The courtroom fell into a heavy silence as the judge, a stern woman with years of experience and a reputation for cutting through pretenses, leaned forward on the bench. Every eye in the room was fixed on her, and even the camera operators seemed to pause in anticipation. This was the moment that could shift everything. The interrogation that would peel back layers of narrative, expose inconsistencies, and force Kody Brown to confront the reality of his actions. Kody straightened in his chair, adjusting his tie for the third time that morning. He had already faced testimony from his ex-wives, documents that challenged his account, and a courtroom buzzing with tension, but nothing compared to the piercing scrutiny of the judge. Her eyes locked onto him, and for a moment it felt as if the weight of every decision, every hidden account, every secret agreement was being measured on that single gaze. "Brown," the judge began, her voice calm but unwavering, "you have heard the testimony and seen the evidence presented by the plaintiffs. I want you to answer clearly. Were all financial assets disclosed to your spouses during your marriages?" The question hung in the air like a thunderclap. Kody swallowed hard, knowing that a misstep could unravel the defense he had so carefully constructed. "Your Honor," he began, his voice steady but slightly strained, "I have always acted in what I believed was the best interest of my family. I disclosed what I could, and I managed family finances responsibly, given the complexity of supporting multiple households and children." The judge's gaze did not waver. "Mr. Brown, this is not about intentions or beliefs. This is about facts. Were there assets, accounts or transactions that your spouses were unaware of?" Kody hesitated. The courtroom seemed to lean in collectively, the tension so thick it was almost tangible. He realized that charm, excuses or general explanations would no longer suffice. This was precision, accountability and truth under scrutiny. Every word mattered. "Yes, Your Honor," he admitted cautiously. "There may have been instances where not all details were fully communicated, but there was never an attempt to deceive or harm anyone. The complexity of our family finances and schedules contributed to misunderstandings." The judge tilted her head slightly, not in disbelief but in quiet insistence. "Complexity does not excuse omission. These were decisions that affected your spouse's lives and financial security. How do you justify lack of transparency when it directly impacted them?" Kody shifted uncomfortably. He had rehearsed defenses in his mind countless times, but facing direct questions from a judge who demanded clarity left little room for evasion. The courtroom seemed to lean closer, waiting for his answer. Reporters scribbled furiously, capturing every nuance, while his ex-wife's expressions remained cold, yet resolute. "My intention was never to harm," he said finally, choosing his words carefully. "I aimed to provide stability, and decisions were made to protect the family as a whole. I realize now that more transparency could have prevented misunderstandings." The judge nodded slowly but pressed further. "Mr. Brown, intention is irrelevant when actions lead to inequity or financial disadvantage. Were there occasions where assets were transferred, hidden or otherwise not disclosed to your spouses?" Kody's jaw tightened. He was cornered, forced to confront years of management decisions under the scrutiny of the law. He realized that the careful narrative he had maintained on television was no longer enough. This was a courtroom, not a studio set, and the consequences were tangible, immediate, and uncompromising. "Yes, Your Honor," he admitted reluctantly. "There were instances where certain transactions were made without full disclosure. I believed they were necessary at the time, but I acknowledge that they caused misunderstanding and hurt." The judge leaned forward, her voice firm, demanding precision. "Mr. Brown, were these instances isolated, or do they represent a consistent pattern of financial control without your spouse's consent?" Kody swallowed the words catching slightly in his throat. "Your Honor, in retrospect I can see that there was a pattern, although I never viewed it as harmful at the time. My perspective was shaped by trying to manage an unconventional family structure under public scrutiny." The courtroom absorbed his confession in stunned silence. For years, viewers had seen Kody as the calm, authoritative patriarch. But here, under the direct interrogation of the judge, the reality of his oversight and lack of transparency was undeniable. The ex-wives' testimonies were validated, their frustrations explained, and the weight of years of control became apparent to everyone present. The judge paused, allowing the moment to settle. "Mr. Brown, this court requires clarity. Were decisions made regarding property, finances, or family resources done in good faith and with consideration for all parties involved? Or were they unilateral decisions that disregarded the interests of your spouses?" Kody took a deep breath, his hands gripping the edge of the chair. "Some decisions were made with good intentions, to protect the family or manage resources efficiently. But I recognize that unilateral actions occurred, and I understand now that this disregarded the perspectives and needs of my spouses. I regret that deeply. The courtroom was tense, the air thick with anticipation. As the final day of proceedings arrived, every chair was occupied, every camera focused, every whisper from the press echoing like a countdown. Months of testimony, evidence, and cross-examination had led to this very moment, the moment where a judge would deliver a verdict that could reshape the life of Kody Brown and his ex-wives forever. For viewers at home, this wasn't just another courtroom drama, it was the culmination of years of fascination, controversy, and high-stakes reality TV drama brought into the real world. Kody sat in his chair, hands tightly clasped in front of him. His usual composure had been tested repeatedly over the course of the trial. The powerful interrogation, the shocking testimony, the meticulous evidence, all had chipped away at the confident, controlled persona he had long maintained. Today, there was no script, no producer, no camera crew editing his story. Today, everything hung in the balance. Across the room, Christine, Janelle, and Mary sat together, their expressions a mixture of anticipation, resolve, and relief. They had spent years navigating a life that often minimized their voices and contributions. Now the scales of justice were tipping in their favor, and the moment of reckoning had arrived. They whispered to each other softly, sharing reassurance, and silently acknowledging that every step of preparation, every document, every testimony, had brought them to this day. The judge entered the courtroom with her usual air of authority. The gavel struck the desk, commanding immediate silence. The room seemed to shrink, as if the walls themselves were leaning in to hear the words that could change everything. Cameras clicked, pens scribbled, and even the journalists, seasoned veterans of reporting, felt the gravity of the moment. This was not entertainment. This was justice. Mr. Brown, ladies and gentlemen of the courtroom, the judge began. Her voice calm but weighted with authority. We have carefully considered the evidence, testimony, and arguments presented during this trial. It is the duty of this court to ensure that fairness, accountability, and transparency are upheld, and that the rights and contributions of all parties involved are respected. A subtle tremor ran through Kody's body. He had prepared for this, yes, but no preparation could fully brace a person for the moment when judgment is pronounced. Every eye in the courtroom seemed to pierce through him, weighing his actions, decisions, and intentions. The judge continued. This case is not merely about financial transactions or property. It is about trust, fairness, and the recognition of contributions that have been overlooked for years. The court acknowledges the complexity of the family dynamic and the challenges inherent in managing multiple households. However, complexity does not absolve responsibility, nor does it excuse lack of transparency. Christine, Janelle, and Mary exchanged subtle glances, each absorbing the words like a confirmation of the truths they had long felt but never fully expressed. Their united front, reinforced by evidence, testimony, and meticulous documentation, had been vindicated in the eyes of the law. Kody's lawyer leaned forward, whispering quietly in his ear, but Kody hardly registered the words. He was focused on the judge, aware that the next sentences would define the remainder of his life, not just financially, but emotionally and reputationally. The tension was palpable, stretching across the courtroom like a taut wire ready to snap. The court finds that there were indeed instances where Mr. Brown exercised unilateral control over family assets without full disclosure or consent from his spouses, the judge stated. While there is no evidence of intentional malice, the actions taken had material and emotional impact on the plaintiffs. The court recognizes the years of dedication, sacrifice, and contribution from Christine, Janelle, and Mary, and affirms that their voices, rights, and interests must be acknowledged. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Cameras flashed. Journalists scribbled furiously as the ruling began to crystallize. For Kody, the words hit hard. Acknowledgement without condemnation, yet a validation of the claims that had been made against him. His public persona of calm control was fractured, replaced by the reality of accountability. The judge continued with specific directives. Mr. Brown is instructed to provide full financial disclosure, ensure equitable distribution of assets, and take measures to restore transparency and trust where possible. This court emphasizes that ongoing cooperation and respect for the rights of the spouses are paramount. Failure to comply may result in additional legal consequences. The room absorbed each sentence, the weight of judgment palpable in every corner. Kody's face remained composed outwardly, but inwardly, he was processing the implications. Financial repercussions aside, this was a public acknowledgement that his authority, once unquestioned, had limits, and that the women he had once overshadowed now held undeniable power, both legally and morally. Christine exhaled quietly, a small, almost imperceptible smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Janelle's hands, clasped tightly together moments ago, relaxed slightly. Mary remained composed, but her eyes betrayed a quiet satisfaction. Their preparation, patience, and unity had not only secured justice, but had reshaped the narrative surrounding the Brown family. Outside the courtroom, the news spread like wildfire. Headlines declared, Kody Brown held accountable, ex-wives vindicated in court, and reality star faces legal reality. Court confirms financial mismanagement. Fans who had followed the family saga for over a decade debated endlessly, dissecting every moment, questioning every motive, and analyzing the implications. Social media exploded with commentary, memes, and reactions, all centered on a verdict that had delivered both validation and consequence. Inside the courtroom, Kody's defense team reviewed the directives, preparing for the steps required to comply with the court's ruling. But for Kody, compliance was only part of the challenge. Reputation, relationships, and the perception of the public, these were far harder to repair. The judge's words had done more than allocate assets. They had redefined the moral and emotional landscape of the family. The ex-wives, united as they had been throughout the trial, now carried a sense of closure. For years, their contributions had been overshadowed by television narratives, miscommunications, and unilateral decisions. Now the law had formally recognized what they had long known: their sacrifices mattered, their voices were essential, and justice could be achieved. The gavel struck once more, signaling the end of the session. The verdict was official, the ruling clear, and the courtroom buzzed with the aftermath of history in the making. Kody rose slowly, acknowledging the judge, then the audience, and finally the women who had faced him with unwavering resolve. The acknowledgement was small but significant, a silent recognition of the consequences he now faced. As the crowd began to disperse, the weight of the verdict lingered. This was more than a courtroom story. It was a narrative of accountability, resilience, and the shifting dynamics of power. Kody Brown, once untouchable in the public eye, had faced legal and moral reality, and the ex-wives, united and prepared, had emerged with their voices amplified, their contributions validated, and their presence undeniable. For viewers and fans, this chapter of the Brown family saga would not be forgotten. It had drama, tension, and shocking revelations, all elements that had drawn audiences to reality television. But it also carried a deeper message. No matter how much control one thinks they hold, accountability, truth, and justice always find their way. And as the doors closed behind the departing crowd, one thing was clear. The verdict that had shocked fans was not just about money or property. It was about justice, recognition, and the undeniable strength of those who had been underestimated for far too long. Kody Brown's story had changed forever, and the world would continue to watch as the consequences and the ripple effects unfolded. The courtroom doors closed behind the final session, leaving behind a silence heavy with the echoes of history. Outside, reporters swarmed, phones flashed, and social media lit up like a wildfire. For fans who had followed the Brown family saga for over a decade, the verdict was more than just a legal decision. It was a seismic moment, one that would ripple across every platform, every conversation, and every opinion about Kody Brown and his ex-wives. Within hours, the story dominated headlines. Kody Brown held accountable, ex-wives vindicated, screamed across news outlets. Courtroom drama shakes reality TV patriarch to the core appeared on morning shows. Fans flooded forums, comment sections, and social media feeds, sharing reactions that ranged from shock to validation to outright glee. Millions debated the implications. How would Kody adjust to this new reality? What would this mean for the family dynamic? Could public perception ever recover from such a blow? The ex-wives, meanwhile, found themselves navigating a very different kind of spotlight. Christine, Janelle, and Mary were no longer secondary characters in a story dominated by Kody. Their voices had been validated in the most public of forums, a courtroom. They received messages from supporters, former fans, and even strangers who admired their courage and resilience. To social media buzzed with hashtags praising their unity and strength. #Justice for the ex-wives, #Truth revealed, and #Kody Brown accountable began trending within hours of the verdict. Christine reflected on the journey as she walked out of the courthouse. Years of careful planning, preparation, and strategic thinking had led to this moment. She realized that the courtroom victory was about more than finances or property. It was about reclaiming dignity, establishing agency, and proving that their voices mattered. "We were finally heard," she whispered to herself, feeling a mix of relief and empowerment. Janelle, ever composed, felt a quiet sense of triumph. The courtroom had given the women a platform they could not have achieved alone. For her, the victory wasn't just legal, it was symbolic. It sent a clear message to the public that resilience, preparation, and unity could overcome even the most formidable opposition. She understood that this moment would forever redefine the narrative surrounding the Brown family. Mary's perspective was equally profound. As the first wife, she had often felt the weight of responsibility and oversight, managing relationships and mediating disputes. The courtroom had allowed her to finally speak her truth without interruption, without misrepresentation, and without the distortion of television editing. For her, the aftermath was an affirmation that justice could be pursued, and that acknowledgement was possible even after years of marginalization. Kody, on the other hand, faced a different reality. The media coverage, combined with the judge's clear directives, meant that he could no longer control the narrative. His public image, carefully cultivated through television appearances, social media, and interviews, had been irrevocably challenged. Fans debated his intentions, scrutinized his actions, and questioned the ethical and emotional consequences of his decisions. The scrutiny was relentless, the public discourse unflinching. In the weeks following the verdict, social media became a battleground of opinions and theories. Clips from the courtroom circulated endlessly, often accompanied by commentary dissecting Kody's reactions, the ex-wives' statements, and the judge's precise wording. Memes, reaction videos, and TikTok summaries amplified the drama, transforming the legal decision into a viral phenomenon. Viewers who had never watched Sister Wives tuned in, curious about the story that had captured national attention. The public reaction was multifaceted. Some fans sympathized with Kody, arguing that managing such a complex family structure under constant public scrutiny was an enormous challenge. Others championed the ex-wives, praising their courage, preparation, and unity in confronting systemic inequality within their family dynamic. Online forums buzzed with debates about fairness, morality, and responsibility, often drawing parallels to broader social and cultural issues surrounding family, accountability, and transparency. Meanwhile, the courtroom's impact extended beyond public perception. Legal experts weighed in, analyzing the judge's decisions, the implications for family law, and the precedent this case might set for unconventional family structures. Podcasts and news programs dissected the intricacies of asset disclosure, the importance of transparency, and the consequences of unilateral decision-making. The story had evolved from a reality TV fascination into a case study in accountability, ethics, and legal process. The Brown family itself faced a new era. Relationships had shifted, roles were reevaluated, and boundaries were reinforced. Kody had to comply with the judge's directives, ensuring transparency and equitable treatment.